Welcome to Weekly Grooves. My name is Tim Houlihan.
And I'm Kurt Nelson. Each week, Weekly Grooves explores a current topic through a behavioral lens, looking to shine a different behavioral perspective on that topic than what you might get in everyday news. It's relevant, short, fun, and insightful.
Kurt and I have been working in the world of behavioral interventions for more than 20 years, helping clients understand what drives their behavior and what they can do to change them. Now, we also host another podcast called Behavioral Grooves, in which we conduct long-form interviews with behavioral scientists and practitioners. And I mention this because our background and experience are relevant to what we bring to this show.
Hopefully, we can bring an expertise to this that is a bit unique and grounded in actual science.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so what's our topic for this week's Groove?
All right. So there was an article in The Atlantic this week by McKay Coppins called "The $1 Billion Disinformation Campaign to Re-elect the President." It talks about how in 2020, there's an ongoing war of disinformation in the election, some background on how that has come around, and the potential impact that this may have on our election and society.
Yeah, the author created a Facebook account to understand what was going on in the Trump campaign.
A fake Facebook account that he did. Yep.
An alternative to get sort of the other side perspective. And that, what he started to see really got him curious, and that led him to do a lot of research on this particular topic.
Yeah, so he went back and looked at the 2016 campaign, explored some of that. One interesting fact that they bring up is that the Trump campaign ran 5.9 million ads on Facebook during the 2000 from, I think it was November or June to November, while Clinton's only ran 66,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, just that craziness. And then also looking forward, right? So one of the other pieces that was mentioned is that the Republican National Committee and the Trump campaign have reportedly compiled about 3,000 data points on every voter in America. And so with this disinformation campaign, what is going to happen, right? And so I think what we want to groove on is, so what can behavioral science tell us about disinformation and what we can do about it, if anything?
Okay, so this has been going on for a long, long time.
Yeah, fake news, disinformation is not some new high-tech fangled thing that has only come around in the past 10 years. It goes back to the 8th century, right?
It does.
Or further.
Well, the Pope was trying to make sure that everybody believed that the whole Roman Empire was under the Pope's domain. And so it created this document called the Donation of Constantine, when supposedly in the 4th century, well, what the Pope claims is that in the 4th century, Constantine donated the whole Roman Empire basically into the Pope's control.
So, which was not true
true at all.
But they used that to spread disinformation
for hundreds of years.
Right. And if you just think about the National Enquirer, right, which was started in 1926, you know, many of those stories are really disinformation, like the Bat Boy or aliens abducted however many people. Yeah. So there we go.
Or the Daily Mail in the UK. Like over 1 million people pick that up 3 times a week.
Right. And it's been going on for a long time.
Right.
But before we go further, what is the definition of misinformation, disinformation, and how does that compare to like a conspiracy theory?
Yeah, I think that's really worth teasing out, because disinformation and misinformation are really similar. They're very, very similar. And that really is about false information, which is intended to mislead, especially propaganda issued by a government organization to a rival power or the media.
Okay.
Is really kind of the whole idea behind it.
And that's not like a conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theories are totally different, because that is a belief that some covert but influential organization is responsible for a particular circumstance or event.
Right.
And that's not what we're talking about today.
Okay.
We're talking about this disinformation.
All right.
Propaganda, basically.
So why do we believe this disinformation? So disinformation comes out, but it's factually wrong. But why do we believe it then?
Well, because we want to.
Okay.
Really. I mean, part of it is that we're put in a context where it makes sense. We have confirmation bias. We have availability bias. It's frequent. It's common. We've got this illusion of truth effect.
Well, and oftentimes the disinformation is embedded within a number of truthful things. So 90% of whatever the information is true, with 10 or 20% being the misinformation. And so when people come across it, it's likely then to get ingested. And even when that disinformation is so far out there that it is just wildly beyond belief, there's a purpose for that, right? Because what that does is it ends up anchoring our system out further so that when the less out there disinformation comes out, it's more believable. And I'll go back to, there was a disinformation campaign about Democrats running a pedophile ring out of a pizza in Washington, D.C., and different things. And then, so for most people, that was not believable, right? They go, that just isn't true. But then they send out other information that talks about how Hillary Clinton is, not as strong against pedophiles as say the Republican counterpart. And then that becomes much more believable because you have this thing in the back of your head that's there. So they're being used in all of these things. And so we tend to believe things because they're all the biases that we have, but it's also wrapped in these elements where they anchor us so far out that then they can bring in some of the more subtle ones.
Exactly. Another quick example of that is before the election, there was a message about Hillary Clinton saying that blacks are super predators. Right. And that was used specifically in Florida, and it was successfully suppressed the black vote. Now, the thing is that she actually said that gang members can be super predators like 20 years before this.
And so again, they're bringing in some shred of truth. And the fact that, with disinformation in today, that part of what the article is talking about is the ability to micro-target. Yeah. So you have this ability to be able to send a specific message to a subset, a very small subset of the larger population that you have identified. So in that case, that message only went out to black voters in Florida.
Right.
And so that ability to send that specific message to that group allows it to seem that it is that it's specific to you, and so it's believable. And then they also use messenger effect, right?
Right. As we know from our conversations with Steve Martin and Joe Marks, this who is saying it makes a big difference to us, right? So if it's coming from a source that we believe is credible or trustworthy, then we have a much higher degree of believability.
Right. So if they say somebody has said this and we trust that person, then we don't necessarily go in and really think about it. We just trust that.
That's right. Well, and we've also got social proof around this, right? So, I mean, something as simple as like a laugh track, I mean, as silly as it is, and we know that we can recognize a laugh track. We know that it's not real, and yet it still has a positive influence on how we experience something. So just believing that other people are believing it, that gives us more reason to think, well, maybe I should believe this too.
Social proof, bandwagon effect, all of those factors that we've talked about before. So the purpose of disinformation really is to change behavior. And so it's done by these political operatives in order to change behavior. Specifically, if you can hit on somebody's emotional triggers to get either rile up your base, right, to get them so upset that they are definitely going to go out and vote. There's nothing that's going to, it doesn't matter if it's a snowstorm in New Hampshire or wherever it is, you're going out there because it is just my duty to go do it. Or as you mentioned in the case in Florida, to suppress the vote of the opposition, their base and the people that would probably vote against you.
Yeah.
So that's really, if you're thinking about disinformation, they're really trying to drive those behaviors, and
they're trying to drive the behaviors of large groups, of sort of the center. These messages tend to come from the fringes, and are trying to influence the behaviors of the people who are potentially more gullible, right? But also just more in the center, and they're using availability bias and confirmation bias and the frequency effects to get those messages adhered to and believed by more people in the center of the bell curve, not so much on the political campaign, but in the bell curve.
Right. So, what can we do, as we've talked about before, to inoculate ourselves against believing this disinformation, or even worse, maybe being part of the problem and disseminating this disinformation out to our social groups?
Well, Jamie Carroll wrote a book on leveraging the OODA loop with digital analytics to counter disinformation. Brand new book. And the author is making a claim that the OODA loop, and I'll explain that in just a minute, is a great way of sort of breaking things down into smaller parts and saying, wait, stop. I mean, really, ultimately, it comes down to stop, right? We're not just going to believe it instantly. So there's just 4 quick aspects to the OODA loop. OODA was developed by the U.S. military, and it's really about observing first. OODA, observe first, kind of understand what the situation is, right, and then orient yourself to the situation and what's going on. What are the potential theories? And then after you observe and orient, then you decide. Then you actually can make a decision about what it is that I'm hearing. If I understand the context, if I understand what the intentions and motivations might be, and then act. Then you can actually say, okay, now I know where I'm going. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to actually act on this to implement, a new way of thinking about this.
So it's a nice process to think about. So going back, Viktor Frankl had said, there's that gap between the stimulus and the response.
Exactly.
And in that gap, we should be taking a moment to really understand, as you said, to observe, orient, and then decide as part of that OODA loop.
All right. Absolutely.
So great. So I think that's good. And obviously then you can also go out and you can look for sites that are fact checkers.
Yeah, there's a couple of really, really good sites out there. One is factcheck.org that I've been familiar with and really appreciate for their bipartisan approach.
Yeah.
But the second one is called Snopes, and they're really dedicated to journalistic integrity.
Yeah, they've been around for a while, but yeah.
They have. It just happens to be new to me, but they're founded on really high integrity, high quality content.
So some of the behavior change that is trying to go on with this too is not just in behavior change on voters, but it's in our belief and trust in everything. So some of the operatives that are doing this are really looking to disrupt that trust. So Gallup did a poll in 2017 where they said only 14% of Republicans believe that the media get the facts straight, while 62% of Democrats believe that the media is there. And if you go back to 1988, it was roughly about 52% believe the media
for both.
So you can see where that's gone. And when we're talking about fact checkers, this is really interesting because, again, even the fact checkers are believed to be part of the media. So again, looking at this, 70% of Republicans are saying that those fact check organizations are actually favor the Democratic side, so that they're believing even the fact checkers are part of the problem, right?
Right, which would be a little closer to the conspiracy theory.
Right. Yeah. So as we're looking at this, right, I think those are some interesting things to take into account.
Yeah, and there's one other thing that I just want to mention, and that is that there is a lot of scholarly research that's being done in this area, but there's not really a lot that's because we understand the fundamentals, right? We've been just talking about all the fundamentals, but there isn't any empirical research in the field or even in the lab to understand what the complete impact is on voters, for instance, or consumers.
All right. So let's start recapping.
Okay, so to recap, we need to be aware of a couple of things, right? The first is that disinformation comes from the extremes of society, those who are most interested in creating or benefiting from chaos, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing is that disinformation is not new.
Nope, it's been around for a long, long time, generations and generations.
Thirdly is that scholars don't fully understand all the impacts that this could have on individuals or societies. We're still figuring that out. And lastly, it works.
Yeah, and it works because we have these human biases and heuristics, that we are emotional, that there's this motivated reasoning aspect, that there is elements of availability bias, and
Right.
that a lot of disinformation gets wrapped in with some truthful information, and so it's hard to discern. And actually, that disinformation can change our beliefs and our behavior, and so people are going to use it because for them the ends justify the means. Right?
So what can we do?
All right. So it may sound bleak, but there is something that we can do, right? When you see a message that you're not sure is 100% accurate, use the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. So take in and observe the context in which you're seeing this information. Orient yourself with a review of the source in a critical way. Make sure that that source isn't coming from,
Right.
it's not being cited by a number of things, and it's all from one really suspect source, right? And then make a decision by asking, is this from someone I might not trust? Would I still believe it, right? So if this was said from maybe somebody I didn't necessarily have as much trust in, would I still believe this?
Yeah.
Am I just being influenced by the fact that it is said by somebody that I believe and trust in? And finally, take action by deleting the content created or the disinformation. Another piece, we had talked with John Fuez, who on our other Behavioral Grooves, and he mentioned, look, if you see something kind of out of whack in your social media and it comes 4 or 5 times, that's where you start to get suspect.
Yeah.
Because then it's being amplified by some reason, and it's probably something that's going on.
Definitely. Well, that wraps up this episode of Weekly Grooves. And since this is a relatively new podcast, we'd very much appreciate a quick rating, or even better, a quick review. If you like our approach, please let us know. And if you think we can improve, let us know that. You can contact us directly on Twitter, and I can be reached at @THoulahan, and Kurt can be reached at @WhatMotivates. And we'd love to hear from you.
And if you're not already a subscriber, check out our long-form interview podcast called Behavioral Grooves. That podcast has listeners in over 100 countries and focuses on how researchers and practitioners are applying behavioral science to their work and life to make a better world. We'll have links in the show notes.
Thanks for listening.